Hey, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting our students to learn what we teach. And I am Rob Alvarez. I'm the founder of Professor Game and professor of gamification and games-based solutions at IE Business School, EFMD, EBS University, and many other places around the world. And if this content is for you, then please go ahead and subscribe to our email list for free at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hello, engagers, and welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have Jed with us today. But Jed, before we take off, are you prepared to engage?
I am prepared to engage.
Let's do this, because we have Jed today, and his mission is to bring more trust, connection, and playfulness to the world. And why? Because for him, that's what makes life fun, meaningful, and worth putting up with the necessary, I'm not going to use the word live here, but you can see it in the show notes or a version of that. And he is a coach. He's also the co-creator of Cozy Juicy Real, which is a board game that gamifies human connection and builds stronger relationships for friends, families, and complete strangers. It's been described as deeper connections disguised as a board game. He comes from the US and he lives in Valencia, Spain. So we're not exactly neighbors. We're not that far away at this point. And he is looking forward to buying 2 tiny dogs and living in a relatively simple life. So Jed, is there anything we're missing that you want to mention of your intro?
Oh, I think that pretty much covers it. Thank you. That was wonderful.
Amazing. So Jed, we always like to know a little bit more about our guest's life. What does it look like? What does it feel like to be Jed in a day like today, or any other day you want to use as an example?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. This is wonderful to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Yeah. What does it feel like to be me on an average day? I would say, I think like most humans, I've got an emotional range. And so depending on the day and depending on how I'm feeling, that will vary. But I'd say a good day for me, a beautiful day for me, looks like a mixture of gratitude, of excitement, appreciation for the subtleties, and hopefully some connection with my partner, with my family, and with some friends here in Valencia. For me, that's a good day.
Amazing. And what would, do you have any examples of what that would look like in practice, right? In your job or in your personal life, if you want to get into that, what would that look like?
So, the first thing that comes to mind really quickly when I'm thinking about gratitude, and I had this image in my mind really clearly as I was answering that question, is I try to start every day, regardless of how tired I am, regardless of how much sleep I got, with some form of exercise, whether I feel like it or not. So I am lucky enough to live near the beach. That's one of the reasons I'm in Valencia. And so I can go for a run. And because I grew up in a landlocked city of Salt Lake City, I just love getting out and getting some sunshine and pushing myself to do something that I don't want to do necessarily. And that's really good for me to push through that challenge. So that's a big part of what the day actually looks like and what is important to me. And then the connection piece, a lot of my work is about connection. And it's actually built from the connection with my partner and my co-creator of Cozy Juicy Real, because, we're the ones that built this together. And that's kind of the foundation for Cozy Juicy Real. It's a board game about connections. And so that connection to my partner, Sophia, is really foundational to that. And then the events that we lead online with teams all over the world, that is all about helping teams connect, remote teams, hybrid teams that don't have the proverbial water cooler. And so we help them connect at a personal level. We help them not fall into the trap of just going straight into work talk and actually getting to know each other as people. So that's a big part of what feeds me, is seeing people at the start of an event and then seeing people at the end of the event, and how the energy, how the change, the shift that happens from that.
That sounds exciting and amazing for sure. So thank you for sharing those moments with us, with the engagers here on Professor Game. But Jed, it definitely is a really important moment for us to understand one of those times where you actually went through one of our fail moments or first attempts and learnings. We want to be there with you. We want to feel what happened there. We want to take some lessons away from that experience. Essentially, want to sit right next to you.
I have certainly had my handful of failure moments. I think that's just part of the human experience. So what do you think? I'll give you an option. Would you like a fail in my life before Cozy Juicy Reel or a fail in my life during Cozy Juicy Reel?
Whichever has more to do with games or board games or anything in between.
Okay. Then it's definitely during Cozy Juicy Reel. So a fail that comes to mind first is in the development days of Cozy Juicy Reel. And I think it's important to give people there's a little bit of background on what the game is about and what we're seeking to create. So the story and the context has some context. So essentially, it's a board game that helps players naturally, easily, organically connect with whoever they're playing with, whether it's people they have just meeting for the first time, whether it's friends they've known for decades, whether it's their family. It's a game that warms people up through light and easy questions. Those are the cozy questions. To juicy questions where they get a bit more points and they share a little bit more about themselves if they choose. And then real questions, which are worth the most points, and you share a little bit more and open up a bit more with those. So that's the core of the game mechanics, is those 3 decks as you move around the game board. And we're happy with where the game is now. But I mean, as you know, right, and as your listeners know, it takes years to get a game to a really precise place where it's having the effect that you want it to have. And you've got to fail 1,000 times before you get there. So one of our big fails, one of my big fails, was in one of the early gameplays. We were living in London when this game was developed. And what we would do for playtest groups is we would use, couchsurfing.com?
No, I haven't heard of it.
So couchsurfing.com, it's a place where anybody can kind of go. It's an online community of like travelers and digital nomads. And you can also put events there. So we would just put an event in London. We'd say, hey, meet at this pub Tuesday night. Whoever wants to come can come and play this board game. We wouldn't tell anybody that we made it. We just wanted to meet people, and we wanted to also see how the game was working. So that was kind of the play test for the years that we were doing it. And one of these days we met at a cafe. Some people showed up. We played Cozy Juicy Reel. And one of the play testers, through the course of the sharing and the deepening of the conversation, shared that she had recently had her heart broken. And it was a really vulnerable thing to share. Yeah. And you could just see in her face that it was very real and very raw, and that she was kind of out on a limb sharing that. And there was this kind of pause. And then the next person, maybe to fill the silence, they were like, okay, I guess it's my turn now. And then the conversation moved. And that sat with me for months, because that woman had just shared something really real for her. And there wasn't a mechanic built into the game to affirm and acknowledge that she'd just shown a hell of a lot of courage and done that with a group of people that she just met 30 minutes before. And I knew that something had to change, and I didn't know what it was. And it took me months to figure out a mechanic that could recognize players who go out on a limb like that and encourage the whole group to go there. So that was a fail, and it took me a while to figure it out.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And, it is always important to come through these moments, come across these moments, but also have that attitude that I think that you did have, definitely, which is, what can we do about it? How can we do it better? This is feedback. This is something new that we're understanding. What can we do now? And talking about what can we do now, can we actually go for the opposite? Actually, a great moment, one big challenge that you were facing and actually solved using your game strategies, your game, or we could even have a segue into what you were discussing before and say, actually, what happened after that fail, and what did you do about it? But whatever you want to go for, of course, that's up to you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think since I was just talking about the fail, I'll go to how we solved that one, because we're really happy with that, and we're grateful that's been built into the game now. So what was developed, through that kind of unsettling experience, I'll call it, because I think that's exactly what it was that now we've got something called spark cards. And basically what those are, we've brought affirmation and vulnerability into the gamification of Cozy Juicy Reel. So basically what it is each player has a number of cards that they can give other players while you're playing, right? So for example, you've got a high five card. You've got a what about you card, right? So if somebody shares something that you appreciate, you give them a high five card, and they're receiving points for that. If someone shares something you're curious about, you can give them a go deeper card and ask them a follow-up question. And if somebody shares something like, wow, my heart was broken recently. And they tell you that story, or they open up about it in any way, you can give them a courage card. And that card itself is worth the most points of any of these purple spark cards that I'm talking about. And so it's built into the game to recognize people for going there and opening up about something that they might not usually.
Sounds amazing. And it sort of goes right through and straight in to what the game is all about, and how you've been doing all those things through that experience, essentially getting people to know each other thanks to a tool, which is the game that you guys have created, that allows or facilitates for people to actually share those moments, right?
Mm.
So Jed,
yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I was going to say, yeah, you use a key word there, which the facilitate word, and that really is. I mean, I'm surprised you picked up on that, but that it really is the idea is that we're trying to, I guess, like any game maker, facilitate an experience when we're not even in the room, trying to create a certain vibe just through the mechanics.
Makes sense. And that's something one of the things when I'm on my workshops and classes, when I'm teaching students as well, is, I always trying to help them remember the fact that more often than not, whatever it is that they create has to stand on its own 2 feet. What does that mean? That when they're not there, it still has to work. So they have to create an instruction manual. If it's an app, they have to make sure that those rules are clear, whatever that looks like, because eventually they will not be there. If they want this to go beyond just themselves, if they don't, that is also fine. But if they want this to go beyond themselves, they have to make sure that something is able to survive when they are not in that position. All right. So, amazing segue into that for sure. Thanks for sharing that as well, Jet. So, Jet, one more thing that we would like to know about this experience that you've had with Cozy Juicy Reel.
Yeah.
Is, after this experience, perhaps you have something else in mind, or something else you want to create, or something else you've created before. I don't know what that looks like. But in general, if you were to face a process like this one again, or a project like this one again, with your experience, or how did you do the Cozy Juicy Reel, we just want to know how that looks like. How do you approach these problems, and when you're going to come up with a solution, what does that look like? What does it mean?
So what was our process creating Cozy Juicy Reel? What would my advice be to myself, 6 years ago, if I could do it again, that kind of thing? So I've definitely, like I said, made my fair share of mistakes and learned a lot. So the first few things that come to mind are get off your butt and just prototype. Just create the worst version, the worst MVP that you can possibly create, and just start playing it with whoever will do you the favor, really. Because at the beginning, it's not going to work. It's probably not going to be a great experience. That is the necessary part of the process. And if we let it stay in the idea space for too long, it doesn't go anywhere. So any creator just needs to, get off their butt, create the crappiest. That is my challenge to any listener who is thinking about creating a game or writing a book, anything. Just create the crappiest MVP that you can in the shortest amount of time. And you will learn so much from that process. You will learn so much from that. And just play that with a few friends, get the next iteration going again. Just make it 1% less crappy. That's all you need to do. If you can make it 1% less crappy and do that for a while, then you're going to end up with something wonderful. And that leads to my second piece of advice that I wish, I could have given myself 6 years ago, which is patience. I was horribly impatient with this project because I was really excited. And I think, you can probably relate to this. A lot of your listeners can probably, when you have an idea for something you want to bring into the world, it's exciting. And this is the kind of project that lights me up. And I wanted to bring it into the world quickly because I had this pool to do it, because I could see its potential even in the early days. But I was working a full-time job. My wife and co-creator, Sophia, she was working a full-time job. We simply didn't have the time to put into this full-time. And so it took us years to get to a place where people were finally saying, Jed, how do I buy this? How do I get this? Like, this is something special. It took years. And I think that was a painful process to go through, but it was also in hindsight a necessary process to go through because it took those months in between the playtesting for my mind and Sophia's subconscious to be playing on these problems so that we could come up with novel solutions. I don't, maybe some people are geniuses at solving these kind of, gamification problems. For us, it just took a long time. So patience would be my second piece of advice I wish I'd had at the beginning.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that process.
Just a quick break before we continue with this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate if you share it with your friends and family and on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's at RobAlvarezB and the hashtag ProfessorGame, all one word. And in Facebook, you can find the Professor Game page. Thanks in advance for your engagement.
And Jed, I think you've shared quite a few, pieces of advice in that sense. I don't know if you want to sort of circle back to one of them or say something else, but this question has everything to do with, a best practice or something that you say, well, do this when you're creating your project, and at least you'll have a better time doing it, or the results will be better, or, anything in between.
So a best practice, I think, the voice in my head says, does this just relate to Cozy Juicy Real? But I'm actually pretty sure that it would relate to any gamification process or really any business development process. And my answer to that is one word: empathy. Why is my answer empathy? My answer is empathy because as you are developing any product, whether it's a game, whether it's an app, whether it's a food delivery service, whatever it is, you've got to really step into the world of another person and quiet down your own voices enough, internal voices, to really feel into what would it be like as a user. And that can come in the form of, of quiet time. It can come in the form of journaling, come in the form of meditation. It can come in the form of playing it yourself. But I think that whatever your individual process is, you've got to create time in the development stage to really feel into what is this going to be like as an end user so that you can develop something that's going to, in the end, be really meaningful and really valuable for them.
That sounds amazing. And I think empathy is absolutely crucial. You need to know who you're creating for, what they need at that time, and understand them as much as possible. And something that I think builds a little bit more of that empathy is that time of playtesting, when you actually get to know some of those potential users or just other people, and you want to validate what is going on through your head, what is going on through your ideas, and see how that looks. What's the look in the face of somebody else? What do they think, right? And if you approach it with at least the intention of empathy, eventually I think it's a muscle that you can start to build up more and more. Would you agree? Does it make sense in your head, Jet?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you're talking, what's also occurring to me is the piece that I didn't share, and that I think a lot of people leave out, is that one way for us to access empathy for our end user is just by listening to ourselves, by us using the product that we're developing and asking ourselves, being attentive to our own, to what's coming up for us. Do we feel excited in that moment that we're playtesting? Do we feel bored in that moment that we're playtesting? Do we feel curious? And just paying attention to that, because if you're feeling it, then chances are somebody else may be feeling it as well.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that advice. And Jed, after hearing these questions, after, sort of feeling what the podcast is all about, does somebody come to your mind that you say, well, look, Rob, Professor Game should have this person on the podcast? I'd be very curious to listen to the answers this person gives. I want to know more about them, perhaps. Or, I would just like to listen to them. Sort of a future guest for Professor Game.
Yes, somebody definitely comes to mind. So about 6 months ago, through complete happenstance, luck of life, I was able to meet somebody who's become a friend of mine, someone named Neerish, and maybe he's listening to this podcast. But I would recommend him as a guest. Interestingly, he has a podcast himself, but I just think he's a really interesting guy. He's very focused on design. He teaches design. He leads teams on design sprints. But he's a very, what's the word? He has a high emotional IQ. Yeah.
Huh.
And so he's just a really interesting, caring, thoughtful person. And so I think you would enjoy him personally, and I think your listeners would enjoy him as a guest.
Amazing. Can you repeat the name and last name of this person?
No, I'm forgetting his last name right now.
Okay.
I'll send it to you so I can put it in the show notes, but it's nearish.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Sure. We'll get to that for sure. So Jed, you've given us a recommendation of somebody you'd like to listen to. But how about a book? One of those things that you say, well, I've learned so much from this book or gotten inspiration from this book that perhaps, of course, would be interesting or that you think would be useful for the engagers. This crowd of people who are looking for things that will feed them and their practice in the world of gamification and game-based learning.
Okay, great. I'm going to give two if I can be greedy.
Sure.
So the first one, I'll make it product and game related. And the second one is more, life related. So a book that was really instrumental for me in the development of Cozy Juicy Real is a book, I believe it's called The Mom Test. And it is, maybe 100 pages long, a centimeter thick. You can read it in one sitting. It's a really simplified version of what to do when you are testing any product. And it's beautifully laid out. It's very simple. And it's something that I think anybody who's going to be creating a product, testing a product, user testing ought to read. I'm grateful that I read it. So the Mom Test is high on my list.
I had never heard of this book, but it sounds super interesting.
It is super interesting. And then a book that's on my bedstand right now is a book called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. Has that one come onto your radar recently?
No, not at all. 4,000 weeks.
Yeah. So 4,000 weeks is the part of the title because that's the number of weeks that we as mortals get in an average, I believe, 80-year life. 4,000 weeks. And the guy who wrote it, Oliver Burkeman, he was for decades a productivity guru. He wrote articles on productivity. And this book is really, it casts a beautiful shadow on the whole life hacks, productivity world and takes just a stark look at what we can as humans accomplish and what we might consider letting go of for the sake of letting ourselves relax a bit and perhaps being a little bit less ambitious. So it's just a very counterculture, against the grain book. I love it. I feel calmer. That's why I try to read it before I go to bed so that I can sleep a little better at night.
Amazing. Sounds amazing. Thank you for those two recommendations, Jet. Definitely going to look into them for sure. And you sort of discussed other people that have interesting stuff for us, but what about you? What do you say, or would you say is your superpower, that thing you do at least better than most other people?
Oh, these are good questions, Rob. I think my superpower, I think that one of the things that I'm good at is discipline. I'm definitely not batting 100. So I'm hesitant to call it a superpower, but I think that over the years, I've gotten better at discipline and kind of how to form habits that are good for me. So, like we talked at the beginning about, getting exercise in the morning, that's something that for years I kind of put people on a pedestal who did that. And I thought, oh, I wish I were that guy, who had a habit like that. And over the years, I've just kind of worked at it. And so I'm incrementally better at introducing habits that keep me feeling good and that feed me and that help me working towards feeling more alive and appreciating, the little things in life. So yeah, this is definitely a work in progress, but I am proud of some of the progress that I've made on that.
Sounds amazing and like something that is very, very useful as well. So Jed, we arrived to a very difficult question. And, sometimes I say people, you can't cheat, but in this case, I think it's particularly important that you don't cheat by calling out your game, which I'm sure is your favorite game. But outside of Cozy Juicy Real, what would you say is your favorite game?
My favorite game outside of Cozy Juicy Real is not even a game. Because I don't think it can be called as such. I'm a big fan of improv comedy because it always puts me outside of my comfort zone. And, in a way that improv comedy isn't a game, it's more of a tool to get us to access different parts of ourselves There's what would I call it? I would call it a conversation prompt that Sophia, my wife, and I sometimes use. And I don't only encourage, I challenge the listeners to try this sometime, especially if you're ever in just a down mood, to play this game. So the game is really simple. And we could play it right now if you'd like. But it starts with a very simple sentence stem, which is somewhere, someone is. Those 3 words, somewhere, someone is. And you just complete the sentence. Somewhere, someone is having a baby right now. And then the next player goes, someone somewhere is retiring. This is they're walking out of the office for the last time, Yeah. And if you can do it by yourself, you can do it with a journal, you can do it with a friend or a group, but it has an interesting way of shifting the dynamic. And whatever drama, because we've all got dramas that we tell ourselves are very important.
Yeah.
But it really shifts the lens and it brings it back to a telescopic versus a microscopic view on our own lives. And I think that I use that when I'm taking myself a bit too seriously.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, let's call it game. That strategy that you use to get yourself out there. But Jed, time is about to run out. Before we move on to whatever is next in each of our lives, the engagers' lives, we want to know if you have any final piece of advice, any final words for the engagers. Of course, let us know where we can find out more about you, about Cozy Juicy Real, and then we'll say it's game over.
Okay. Well, this has been lovely, Rob. Thank you again for having me. If I were to give any piece of advice, and it's hard to give without having met these imaginary listeners out there, whoever you are. But I would go back to one piece that we touched on earlier, which is just whatever you're thinking of putting out into the world. Because I imagine people who are listening to this there's some dream, there's some vision, and just start at the most basic level and just chip away at it. Accept your own beautiful flawed self and the beautiful flawed product that you will make, and let that be. And see if that dream is what you want to pursue, rather than letting it sit on the shelf. And it may be something you end up putting your life work into, or it may be that you discover really quickly that, wow, this is not what I thought it would be. And both are wins. So being okay with both outcomes because at the end, both are life and time savers.
Absolutely. And where can we find out more about you and Cozy Juicy Real?
All right, great. So if your listeners want to find out more about Cozy Juicy Real, one of the advantages of having such a strange name to a game is that it's very Googleable. So you can just Google us and you'll easily find Cozy Juicy Real. And we host a lot of team building for companies all over the world. So if that's interesting, you can find us for that. And if you're interested in the tabletop version of Cozy Juicy Real, after 6 years of development, we are finally launching on Kickstarter on Tuesday, March 28th until Tuesday, April 27th. And so you can go to Kickstarter and search Cozy Juicy Real there. I'll also send you the links for the show notes. Those are the best ways to find out more about us.
Amazing. Happy and excited to have had you here today, Jed. Thank you for sharing part of your time, part of your energy, part of your insights today on Professor Game Podcast. However, as you know, Jed, as the engagers definitely know, by now, and at least for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, engagers, and thank you for listening to the Professor Game Podcast. And if you want more interviews with incredible guests like Jed, please go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started on our email list for free. That way we can be in contact. You'll be the first to know of any opportunities that we might have for you. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, remember to also subscribe or follow. That's also for free using your favorite podcast app, and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.